I am a freak.
I used to play a lot of fighting games. I think we all did. It was one of the 3 genres that existed before the PS2 dropped. Was that? You still play them? Ha! Gross. The love of fighting games transcends a time where your buddy whipping out the turbo cartridge was an event and jump kicking was the optimal strat, with developers building on the formula of 2 dudes brutally defacing one another with options for extremely high level play. Me, I'm never gonna stop jump kicking. I'm gonna fucking jump kick into the ground. The more time that goes on, the sweatier, more hyper-balanced and clean the core of the genre becomes, and with cleaner offerings, redundancies are scrubbed. The fighting game community has a keen, narrow focus, and I love watching the expert play of community staples like DSP and Black DSP, but it has been a detriment to the replay value for casuals such as myself. Back in my day, a fighting game's content was its seller. You had few people who competed seriously due to a lack of opportunity, so to move that software you had to make sure that pig-fingered mongoloids were catered to through unlockables and unique modes, all entirely contained within the game. Character unlocks, they're a thing of the past. I know they used to be annoying when you'd forget your memory card and wanted to play as Mewtwo to one-stock your mate who does better things than play Melee all day, but wasn't the process of unlocking Mewtwo rewarding? No? Yeah, it was probably a bad example. Since you no longer unlock characters, you clock a modern arcade or story mode and you've done most everything. Sure, you can get good and test your abilities online, but if you don't have a ton of time or motivation to dedicate to being mid-tier at a fighter with questionable netcode, it can be an infuriating experience. After all, we keep the Ethernet cable within arm's length. For a reason. If you love it, you'll love it. If you don't, you don't. That's life. But you know what I loved before they pried it from my slimy grasp? That's right. Extra modes. What was it, like 2 minutes to get to the subject of the video? Honestly, for YouTube, that's pretty good these days. Of course, you've got the classic car punching and might testing, which was just button mashing, but they evolved. They went far beyond. These asides were wholly unnecessary, but were hardly unwelcome because they served as pace breakers. Yeah, it's cool to go back to back to back just stringing victims, but have you ever taken the time to stop and just play some chess? Chess is as much a mind game as competitive fighting. You've got to know your enemy, understand how they make mistakes, and capitalize with swift punishment. Mortal Kombat Deception took advantage of this synergy and it bridged the two together, creating a game mode so intellectually rigorous, only I understand it. Chess Combat, with a K, is a bastardized version of history's favourite tabletop Souls-like with permadeath, taking place on... Taking place on a 10x10 grid instead of the pathetic 8x8 of the traditional variant and featuring characters as fill-ins for pieces. You pick 5 blokes to represent your 8 pawns, 2 champions, which are effectively queens, 3 shifters who aren't really anything, 2 sorcerers who are like kings that cast spells, and your leader, the non-magic king. Grunts have the lowest health and can move twice in a primary direction or once diagonally, and to and fro as they please. Sorcerers also have low health and can only move 1 square, I never moved them, as their utility is in their casts. Each one has a set of magics, 4 spells to aid you and 4 more to ail your opponent. Shifters are the next guys up, and this is a strange class as they take on the form of whoever they're up against, but only sometimes, so the guy you pick, you're probably not going to use him much anyway. Or maybe you will, I don't know. These can move a couple extra spaces and also in all directions. Not quite a rook, not quite a bishop, but far less useful than either. The champions have full health bars and are like queens, but you get 2 of them, and the king can only move 1 space in any direction and has nearly full health. Once he falls, it's game over, so you gotta test that cranial might to keep him well away from a foe. Before combat, a player's tasked with dropping 2 hidden traps, a real one and a fake, somewhere on the grid. The real trap kills a dude and the fake one doesn't. But there are 2 points of control on the board, power cells, which grant the player a life bonus on battle initiation. Owning a node grants you 25% of your health bar back, or 100% if you're standing atop it, with ownership of the second bumping that 25 to a whopping 50%. Owning both cells gives grunts almost the same health as a champion, so there's a legit incentive to rush for them and fight for control, with a K. Not to mention that health totals remain even after combat, so if you slap a dude's leader down to 5% of his bar but lose the encounter, he's still gonna have 5% in the next fight, effectively 1 hit from death. The other way to gain health is to initiate a skirmish, where you're given a neat little 10% boost, so all up you can stack a meaty 60% recovery per battle as you advance if you own both cells and play aggressively. Spells can help by healing or reviving your blokes, teleporting units around and imprisoning or even insta-killing a foe, and each can only be used once, where if a sorcerer is defeated, the player loses access to half his spellbook. I'd imagine these get more tactical utility against a real player over the AI, but I've never seen much of a point to them, as everything's kind of determined by the fights anyway, which have an added element of danger, with a K. Each arena is modest and surrounded by out-of-bounds zones, and if a character ends up there, they die forever in real life. All of these compounding elements mean that players don't have to be that close in skill level to have a fair fight, as they've many tools available, and a bit of strategy might just bridge a skill deficit, creating an engaging battleground without getting too sweaty. It's genuinely one of my favourite modes in any game, and I don't even like chess, or Mortal Kombat. We've had chess 2 this whole time, and you've been sleeping on it. This type of extra mode takes it to the next level. There was evidently a lot of care and thought put into what should be a fairly small inclusion. Or, they winged it and lucked out, but I've got to believe it was intentional, as deception is home to other solid helpings, such as puzzle combat. You ever play Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo? The Street Fighter spin-off where they make a quick trick brick stack? Or was it a quick trick block stack? Yeah, well, they stole it for this game and crammed it in as a smaller side, even down to the endwarvened character models, and I gotta say, it's blatantly stolen, but it's very welcome. You line up coloured blocks, then drop breaker blocks on them, which passes the savings onto your foe, with combos for higher output, then the winner gets crushed by a big stompy machine. While the mode isn't a game seller, nobody bought Deception for Puzzle Combat, I've sunk a decent amount of time in with my wife over the years, and we've also played Puzzle Combat. I'm not amazing at the PS2 Mortal Kombat games, you can probably tell from the footage you're watching, but she doesn't play games at all, so I appreciate Puzzle Combat. However, I'm gonna be honest, Pokemon Puzzle League's better anyway. The final mode is Conquest, which is an extended story/tutorial that runs you through the life of a new character to Deception, and also allows you to play as each real character to get a feel for them, as he's a shapeshifter type guy. Generally, fighting games offer small drips of narrative for clearing arcade modes, a little backstory for how a bear ended up in the King of the Ironfist tournament. And I love these, especially in Tekken where nothing makes sense and everyone hates Jin as much as I do. Taking those drips and turning it into a bunch of explorable maps with NPCs you can assault and secrets and whatnot is a great incentive for single player. It's ultimately a long tutorial, but they managed to make it not feel like one, as it's fairly open, you can enter houses, there's a time mechanic, and you get plenty of the various coloured coins, which is this game's currency. Both with a K. Is it great? It's whatever. For a Mortal Kombat pleb like me, it's pretty useful. It certainly upped my chess game, but I can imagine even a remotely experienced player being bored to death and rushing through it for the rewards and secrets. Before I move on from Mortal Kombat, just a quick shout out to Armageddon, which has a similar story mode I didn't bother with, but also has motor combat, which, I think the less said, the better.
We have toyed with the ninja long enough.
Guys, God bless the ring may sound like a Reddit top comment, but it's actually a fighting game. And a roguelike dungeon crawler for the PlayStation. The fighting is iffy. The only selling point is that you can play as about half the cast of Final Fantasy VII, and most of the extra modes are garbage. There's beach running, doing laps of awkwardly sized circuits with these loose-ass fighting game mechanics, and the last mode is like Othello or Reversi, but you're Sephiroth. The big extra mode, however, is the aforementioned dungeon crawler aspect, where you crawl dungeons and perma-die, but only kinda. You can revive, but if you're not good enough to revive, then I guess it's permadeath. There's nothing particularly special about this, it's not a great game, but if you were one of the 3 kids who got it when it came out, you would have been pretty chuffed. All your mates would have called you a liar while you were trying to explain it, and you would have been rightfully bullied for telling such a blatant lie. They'd never put Cloud or Sephiroth in a fighting game. That's stupid. What would they do? Wait their turn? I can't include this as an example of a good extra mode, and my examples are already pushing it, as the mechanics are entirely estranged from the fighting component. You're not taking them and refitting them for use in a creative way, you're just tacking on a shitty RPG to an already questionable system. However, Errrrrr and its concepts didn't come from nowhere. It was pegged as a spiritual successor to the Tobal series, which does not feature Final Fantasy characters, and the gameplay is marginally worse. But the extra modes make a little more sense. The quest mode in the first title uses the exact same controls as the fighting, and it is genuinely horrible. You gotta crab shuffle your ass around and Beyblade arc through the doors, and there's death pits you gotta jump over. Absolute classic staple of the bottom of the barrel PS1 design. I can see why they overcorrected in Errrrrr and made their dungeon mode playable, but a happy medium already existed between the two styles. Tobal 2 struck an odd balance, resembling Errrrr a little more, but still dying on the hill of fighting game mechanics. The platforming is mostly absent, with you traversing corridors and initiating battle scenes on contact with these floating wisps. There are stats you can increase, health to manage with copious amounts of sleeping, and I didn't play much of it, but I'm sure it goes deeper than Floor 2. I got killed by like a frog or some shit and turned it off. The slew of enemies fought resemble RPG fodder monsters, which to my understanding can be unlocked for use in the standard fighter mode. If the mechanics were better, it'd be a really cool extra mode. There's a consistency to it, where if it clicks, it's really gonna click. It didn't click with me. That's not the end of quest modes, however, as Soulcalibur VI has Weapon Master Mode, and the 6th title brought back a similar scenario, with RPG-like progression systems built around fighting. And I'm sure someone loves them, but for me, it's gotta be Chronicles of the Sword from Soulcalibur III. It's got everything: experience yield, stat growth, gold acquisition, weapon customization, ogre battle. You get to make your own guy and kit him out with all the vanity unlocks to truly make the most Sasuke from Naruto of all time. Could it use the different races from 6? It does have a distinct lack of Colossus ass cheeks, but other than that, this mode is brilliantly infuriating. It's challenging, inspiring, works great in a team, it's a resume stacker, and the best part is, it runs at 10 frames a second and has screen tearing, and also apparently corrupt saves all the time. You know, but outside of that, it's pretty good. Featuring 20 skirmishes, you're tasked with moving a little dude around a path, burning down your opponent's towers, erecting your own, and slowly encroaching their territory until you've bested their 5-man army. These dudes have 2 separate classes. You've got a field class, which changes how they interact with other field characters, and buildings, changing their movement speed, attack values, etc. None of that really matters until you're caught off guard by a band of fellas rushing your main tower, and your units move like their weapon is a walking frame. The second primary class determines your fighting style and stats, and are all vaguely derived from the actual characters, even unlocking extra weapons or ghosting the actual character's skill sets at higher levels. You're forced to interact with the standard combat system in a lot of neat ways, such as stat discrepancies, which, do exactly what you'd expect, and I love getting one-shot by a level 60 on the 3rd map. It's thrilling. Towers have their own effects, such as changing the terrain of an area, turning it into ice, or pulling your foe towards you at all times. There's even one where falling over insta-kills you, which is incredibly infuriating when half the attacks in Soulcalibur are knockdowns. Fundamentally, this mode takes the core of a game and slaps a bunch of extra shit between it, so I can see that criticism striking deep. But where I think it makes up for being a middleman is in its lack of penalty. If you keep even one unit alive, your dead units will infinitely spawn time and time again, so you can throw them at as many brick walls as you can come up against, and there's always a decent chance you'll triumph. Most battles feature multiple units as well, which see up to 5 opponents battling in succession, and this can be a major hindrance, but it can also be used to your advantage. Once you've cleared the rest of the map, sending 4 of your blokes to tackle the regular and super bosses of the stage stacks the deck in your favour. It's much appreciated if you're bad at the game. If that weren't enough, participation trophies are handed out like you sieged a castle with a short bus. Losing a fight still grants the player experience, but losing an entire stage rewards you with gold, with which to buy better weapons or look even more like Sasuke. However, if you do it properly and you clear the stages, you'll be greeted with unique boss cutscenes and secret characters and weapons initially unique to the mode for use in the standard modes. My main gripe is that the final stage kinda undercuts all of the boons of playing this mode. It requires you to get good, and I simply refuse. With no towers, allies don't respawn, which withdraws the penal limpness and makes it quite rigid, and with the map having at least 7 or 8 mandatory encounters just to get to the boss, I'd much rather go bowling. Do you want to come? What's that, you're not a balding man in his late 30s? Ah, that's fine, we'll see what else Tekken has to offer. Tekken 3 has another set of balls to play with in the mode aptly titled Tekken Ball, which is volleyball, but you kill a guy. Slapping the sphere, you can either drive it into your opponent or hope they drop it, which deals damage, eventually killing them. This is how passive-aggressive people prefer to play fighting games. It's fine as a novelty, but there's no meat to it. However, Tekken 3 features another mode called Tekken Force, which is a belt scroller, or a side-scrolling beat-them-up mode. These kinds of games are usually pretty simple. You've got a button for jump, attack, super, and like maybe a block button if you're lucky. Their original goal was to feed quarters from an unsuspecting Ninja Turtles fan at the arcade, and even in attempted modernization, exist as a reminder of how predatory games have always been, even if some of those titles were killer. Taking that concept, giving it fighting game mechanics, and including it for free is cleanly. Because it's next to godly. You move through 4 primary stages, left to right, laying waste to every grunt brave enough to sneak up behind you, whip out a 7-hit combo, and make you start all over. Unfortunately, they didn't iron out a lot of the quirks of adapting a one-on-one fighting game to a mode where you've got to, move more than a few steps, or change directions or targets at a whim, so you're often at the mercy of automated systems that aren't as punctual as required. Not to mention, the AI darts around like a fucking dragonfly and performs these lunging attacks from off-screen that always reach you for some reason. It's a mode where playing too aggressively will eat your ass. You must learn to block and be patient, so it fits perfectly into a fighting game. Tekken 4 would drag Tekken Force kicking and screaming back into our disk drives, and with a new console generation came a new look for the under-realized mode. Instead of strictly scrolling along a belt, we're now third-person fighting through corridors designed like belts, with buttons to manually sift through the enemies you're targeting, and the new perspective making it much harder for cheeky buggers to ambush you from off-screen. I'd say it works much better. However, it's kinda bland in comparison. Every level feels drawn out and way longer than it should have been, where Tekken 3 was more condensed, so it had that just one more try feel to it. Tekken 4 feels like a chore when you get a game over, and all that's really changed is the perspective, and I guess the missing progress bar, which in hindsight might be my entire problem. It's still cool, there's a great opportunity in the future to revise it and clean it up, but after playing the 4th attempt, I can see why they scrapped it forever. After my disappointment, I went scouring for fighting games with similar modes as they naturally blend into one another, and unfortunately, I found some. Guilty Gear Isuka happened to feature one, and the only thing I know about Guilty Gear is that it's got some bangin' designs. The backgrounds, the male characters, the female characters. I've always loved the way this shit looks, but it's far too Japanese for me. I prefer fighters more geared toward Western sensibilities made by proud white men for proud black men, like Street Fighter. However, when I discovered Isuka has a belt scroller mode, I couldn't help myself. It's pretty sick, you fight hordes of generic dudes with your own generic anime dude and get smoked because moving straight to Guilty Gear from Soulcalibur and Tekken brings with it some strange habits you didn't know you picked up. Anyway, you can customize your guy, the palettes, the skills, the supers, but overall, the controls don't feel great and the enemy spam is pretty annoying. In Tekken Force, foes were sparse and would clear out to grant you an earnest one-on-one with the boss of the stage, but here they waddle around amid their pool of generic foes, which you've already experienced on your way to the boss. Half the time, I didn't even know who the boss was. None of my attacks felt like they were doing anything, there was no impact, no weight, as I couldn't see much past the 20 dudes on the screen. It also features a button to manually change your character's orientation, which is present in the standard fighting mode as well, and it sucks. It's horribly unresponsive and leaves me waiting for my dude to turn, or sometimes I accidentally double tapped it thinking I hadn't turned because of the delay, and then it was like, did I double tap it or am I still fucking waiting? I get that they were trying to give you more direct control, but if it ain't broke, don't revolutionize it. Even 3D fighters figured out that movement should automatically orient you to face your opponent. Chasing redundancies, kinda speaks for itself. If you love Guilty Gear, this mode maybe tickles something in you, but even as a guy trying to oversell you on extra modes, I can't endorse it. But what I can do is talk about Tekken some more. Tekken 5 had the Devil with Jin mode, and this is honestly the natural progression from Tekken Force 3 through 4, and then to this abomination. Unbelted from its confines, it's now a third-person action beat-em-up with controls similar to Jin's fighting style, but not quite. In fact, I'd say they're piss poor, just like the rest of this mode. Honestly, I don't even want to talk about it, and not just because I lost to the first boss. I'd much rather talk about a better edition, the cutscenes drizzled throughout the story mode. At this point in Tekken's life, we were used to seeing our beloved characters in wonky pre-rendered cutscenes that didn't make much sense. But now we get treated to in-engine cutscenes that still don't make a lot of sense, but they do bridge certain characters together in ways I'd genuinely forgotten about since playing this game in, I don't know, when did this shit come out, 2007? Yeah, that's pretty epic, gamers, but what's even more epic is actually a last-minute addition to this script in Tekken 6. As I was recording, I would brutally discover they brought back Tekken Force. Tekken 6 took a bold leap forward in a lot of ways, a console generation, a headless robot girl with chainsaw arms, and a bunch of additions that people hated. Apparently, Tekken 6 was quite controversial, and I get it, Azazel is one of the worst bosses I've ever had the displeasure of fighting, but you know what isn't dog shit? The story mode. It takes the best parts of all the past Force modes and angsty Jin and slaps it all together in a genuinely enjoyable, dense mode that tries to have a story, kinda. Mechanically, you start with a devil within tier movement style until you lock onto a dude and it flips your controls to that of a standard fighter. If you confine yourself to the D-pad, you're in fighting mode, but using the stick, you're given free movement, fixing every issue I had with Forces 3 and 4. Your fighting controls are tight, intentional, purposeful, but general movement isn't held back by them anymore. Shuffling along third-person belts using miniguns and flamethrowers on unsuspecting jacks, you hit a boss at the end, unlock him for use in this mode, and then do it all again in the following stage. Enemies drop gold with which you can purchase new vanity gear, but enemies also drop chests. That's right, of the treasure variety. These yield equipment for either the dude you're using or your Russian sex doll companion and come with stat modifiers such as bonus health, elemental damage, increased drop rate of chest, attack increases, and probably more. You don't need a definitive list, but there's gonna be one guy in the comments who's like, oh, you forgot this thing. I didn't forget. I culled it so you don't have to listen to me talk, buddy. I'm doing you a favor. Having the robot accompany you through each stage means that it's not just one dude getting smacked on by a large group of foes. It almost feels like an escort mission, but the stages are so short and her health is so dense that it never becomes one. If she dies twice, you have to restart, but I've seen dudes kick her off the stage and the game let me beat the level no worries, so it's pretty lenient. Overall, I'm glad I went looking for more modes for this video and didn't just stick to my insular, tiny understanding of a broad category of things, because this story mode's the shit. I love it way more than I probably should. Speaking of things I should love less, everybody who knows Dragon Ball fighting games already knows what I'm about to say, but you're still gonna take it in like it's revolutionary information, because that's what Dragon Ball fans do. We all remember the board game Hoppy Node mode in Budokai 2, and for better or worse, I still adore it. Instead of having the story be back-to-back fighting and cutscenes of the same story you've seen 100 fucking times, you move a little piece around a board collecting power-ups, doing side missions, and then gradually jump to the story-important guy who you fight and move on to the next level. Budokai 3 would step this up a notch, featuring a full-blown story mode where you fly around the world and interact with spots of significance. This could include side content, secrets, extra moves for your dudes, and it was bare bones, but it was just enough to keep people happy. Attempted again in Budokai Tenkaichi 2, I'd say it works about as well, though the side content was better and I prefer the battle system, so I'm probably a bit biased. With both titles allowing you to level your character, though in different ways, there was a rewarding through line and repeat playthroughs were heavily incentivized. Budokai 3 would have separate story modes for each character, where Tenkaichi 2 would have a straight story mode from front to back, giving you the relevant characters for each point. I think both are equally as cool. I'm gonna sit on the fence on this one, and you're gonna like it. My personal favourite extra mode in Dragon Ball FighterZ is in Infinite World, where you play Superman 64 tier checkpoint collecting. Ah, got that perked your ears up, didn't it? Now, this video has shown that I have way better taste than that. Though I will say the rest of Infinite World, which is like basically Budokai 4, is heavily overlooked because of that horrible inclusion. My actual favourite is in Tenkaichi 3 with Dragon Adventure, and the resulting Ultimate 100. Dragon Adventure mode is like those old Flash games where you'd manage resources and increase your skills to fuck girls, just without the girl fucking. You pick a dude, any dude, increase your strength and defense, keep your health high, and go adventuring. Then every 10 days you fight a tougher and tougher boss character. Exploring in this mode allows you to pay Bulma to unlock more Ultimate 100 battles, which are sequences of foes set to a theme. I dig the core mechanics of Tenkaichi 3 so much that simply calling 5 dudes the Ginyu Force is justification enough for me to play it. And of course, you know, in every Dragon Ball fighting game, there's the classic tournament mode, where ringing a bloke out is one of the most rewarding things you can do, and they're always great. I had a few titles I played, but no real order or theme in which to cram them, so I'm going to dump them all at the back of the script. That's right, the most interesting part is at the end. Persona 4 Arena Ultimax has Golden Arena mode, which is a string of back-to-back survival mode fights, but you get experience, level up, and assign stats. You're also granted up to 4 Persona skills that actually have a major effect, such as increased attack and defense, health increases, status ailments, and all sorts of shit really. There are thousands of stages, so if you're an RPG grinder like me, you'll get bored and quit after about 60 levels, but pumping your strength and ripping through health bars is kinda sick, because you rarely see such stat discrepancies in fighters. There are different difficulty tiers which have different stats and the floor numbers, with a checkpoint every 5 stages, because you're not expected to clock 100 plus floors in a single sitting, but you know, if you actually cared, you probably would. I had a quick stab at Street Fighter Alpha 3, which is similar. You beat waves of dudes and get abilities like a mid-air auto guard, and different fighting styles have different experience gains, but I dug Golden Arena far, far more. I'm also not a big Street Fighter fan, so that probably had something to do with it. Remember rival schools? Yeah, neither does Capcom, but it had soccer shootouts. Cool. The Japanese version had a dating sim styled game, but we never got that as far as I know, and it's not an extra mode I'd personally vouch for. Dating sims are stupid. Just go date a real person. You don't have to trick me into watching anime. If I wanted to watch it, I'd just do it. And speaking of, Grand Blue Fantasy is a name I've heard a lot, but I know practically nothing about. I know it has a fighting game, which includes an RPG mode, because I played it, and it was fine. It has levels and weapons and whatever, but the whole time I was just thinking about replaying Dragon's Crown, which is not a good look. You don't want to remind people of better things while they're playing your thing. This mode is probably for someone, but as you can tell from the video, I'm more of a 3D fighter kind of guy. The 2D stuff's a bit lost on me, so I didn't get too far. That's about the extent of my knowledge on this subject. As shallow as it is, I even went out of my way to find more games like the ones I wanted to talk about, and I came up pretty short outside of Tekken 6, but I'm sure plenty more exist, and I want to know what they are, so don't keep it to yourself. If I sold the game short, that's because I played a lot of fighting games for this video, and honestly got pretty fatigued near the end. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing a gemmy, but I didn't invest too much time into the games I'd said less about. I mean, obviously. Capturing all the footage for this video has genuinely shifted my perspective on fighting games as a whole. I'd always appreciated people who played them and how aggressively addicted they were, but as a casual I'd play for a couple days and move on, never striving toward the same heights. I'd even scoff at people playing fighting games, like why bother doing that when you're never going to be half as good as the Sweaty Squad, especially when offline modes are so bare bones now. I can say that after making this video, my perspective has shifted, and I completely understand the draw and appeal outside of extra modes, which, let's face it, are garnish at best. But there is a reason they've traditionally been there. Something about sinking 30 odd hours into Soulcalibur 3 and countless hours into other fighters changes a man's brain to the point where I got noticeably better at them than when I started, and that felt pretty good. I guess the fault was in my approach. It's not about being so autistically good at a game that you can compete with some arbitrary tier of player, but about the progression of learning and physically growing your understanding of a game with reflexes and recognition beyond what you were formerly capable of, regardless of what level you end up at. Maybe the true fighting was all the shit we talked along the way. Do extra modes give more opportunities to interface with and better understand the core mechanics? I would say definitively yes, barring a few exceptions. They demand a longer time in the game, which facilitates space to grow, and that's more time with the core mechanics. I hate making videos where I come out the other side with a profound shift in my thinking, so I'm gonna dive back to JRPGs in a big way. Never play a fighting game again. Bye!